Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Continuum of Care Documentation and Training Series, May 2022. I am very excited to talk about today's topic, our occupancy agreement. You know, this particular subject, to me, is an example of great collaboration. I'm going to share my screen. I'm just switching documents right now, so bear with me. But this documentation that we're talking about today, occupancy agreement, this occupancy agreement was actually developed in 2018/19. A bunch of us organizations, CoC organizations, got together and we said, you know what, we wanted to develop a document that was universal, that could be worked across different programs by all organizations. And so CHOP, the Guidance Center, Children's Village, FSSY, West Hab, Lifting Up Westchester, Hope Community Services, DCMH, and DSS, we got together and you know what, we said that we wanted to take the best parts of all our agencies, the various agencies' occupancy agreement and put them into one document and require that our CoC uses this as a model. And so I'm going to take you through that document today. And so, you know, just to talk about the occupancy agreement, first and foremost, it is a HUD requirement. All our CoC organizations need to have this document in your records. What is the occupancy agreement? It's a specific agreement that is made between the client and the housing provider that outlines certain guidelines for participation in a program or occupancy in a unit. So I'm going to go through this occupancy agreement and just, you know, we'll talk about, you know, some of the important parts that need to be in your occupancy agreement. When you see the word subrecipient, that means your organization. Your name would go there and the participant would be the client who's moving into your program. So the first page of our occupancy agreement just talks about, you know, what it is, the HUD guidelines. You can see on the first page, it says what date is this agreement for? The occupancy agreement needs to be completed annually. Below that is the subrecipient, that is your organization's representative, and also the participant, of course, is the client who is entering into your housing program. Signatures are required at the bottom as well as dates. The next page in the occupancy agreement goes through program guidelines. You know, this particular occupancy agreement that we're reviewing today was designed for permanent supportive housing programs, but you can use this information and cater it to your rapid rehousing program or your transitional program. Whatever CoC HUD funded program you have, this is a good model to use. Income information, that should also be a part of your occupancy agreement. If your program charges an occupancy charge as part of your program, then that information would be documented here. Generally, in our permanent supportive housing programs, it is 30% of the adjusted monthly household income, and that information would be documented here. Also, as you can see, after each line is discussed with the client, there's a line at the bottom here where the client or the participant would initial their name to verify that the issue has been discussed with them. Again, this part of the occupancy agreement talks about, you know, their responsibility in residing in the unit. In some units, they might be responsible for electricity, heat, hot water. So you can basically, the client can check off, or you can check off what it is that applies to them in your particular program. And again, they can initial at the bottom. Supportive services. The participant is strongly encouraged to utilize those support services necessary to make independent living feasible. In this particular section, you can please take notice of the word strongly encouraged. It's not mandated, it's not required, Most of our CoC programs are what we call housing first, which means we cannot mandate someone to be in a program or treatment in order to qualify or to be eligible for our program. However, we do strongly encourage individuals to attend whatever program it is that they might be in, whatever supports they might need in order to live a successful, healthy, and a productive life. So that's often a discussion we have with our families. Landlord apartment guidelines. This particular part of the occupancy agreement, just goes through some basic guidelines and rules for tenancy in a unit. Participants are not allowed to use the oven or stove to heat the apartment. These guidelines promote the health, well-being, and safety of the individual in the apartment, their family, as well as others in the building. We certainly want to maintain healthy relationships with the landlords. So these are very important topics that we discuss with the clients on a monthly basis or on the initial, the start of the occupancy. And again, you'll see here that there's a space for the clients to sign, basically saying that they are aware of these guidelines. And again, not all these might fit your particular program or the particular units that your participants are moving into. So you feel free to go through, delete, modify to make this occupancy agreement fit your program. We'll talk about some of the main things you want to make sure that you have in your occupancy agreement. This form is on our CoC website as well. So you can get a copy, you can download a copy and modify it to suit your particular agency. We talk here about, guidelines again, after the individual leaves the program and some of the things that we require and that we need, emergency contacts, very important information. Who should they contact in the event of an emergency? Some of these things are spelled out in a lease between the organization and the landlord, and they can be reiterated here in the occupancy agreement. As I scroll down, again, just basic information that is helpful for the participant to be aware of. Here, we'll talk about termination policy based on HUD regulations. Very important. HUD requires for us to have discussions with the participants regarding termination. Hopefully, we'll never have to get to this point, but there are instances where due to the participants' behavior or guidelines or things that they feel they need to do, that it needs to escalate towards a termination. And so prior to them coming into the program, this needs to be discussed with them. What is the termination procedures? 30 days notice, the specific HUD guidelines. And here I want to talk about, these are some grounds that HUD has says are grounds for termination that you can also discuss with the clients. They are severe, things such as illegal activity in the apartment, assaulting staff. Things are required, failed to allow access for annual HQS inspections. The HQS inspection is mandated by HUD, so it has to happen. And if a customer fails to do that, then that might be grounds for termination. But these are things that are documented in our occupancy agreement that needs to be discussed with the clients. Another very important document that we have incorporated into our occupancy agreement is the Vawa Sublease Occupancy Agreement Addendum. Very important piece of documentation that you as the housing provider needs to review with the participant. The provider's name, client's name, the unit number, and this document basically holds you, the housing provider, accountable. It basically says that A housing provider cannot terminate a client for actions that result due to a client being a victim of a domestic violence incident. So we can't just, something happens, there's a domestic violence issue, something was broken, disruption in the apartment. We can't terminate folks for being a victim. We want to help them as much as we can. Another important part of the occupancy agreement that we've included is the fair housing. Everyone has the right to fair housing. They should not be discriminated against based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, family status, and so forth. And so clients need to understand that they have rights, and they should not be discriminated against for any reason. So this portion is required by HUD for us to have that discussion with the clients. And so we'll have that discussion and have them initial below. Mandated reporter requirements. Some of us serve families, and there are guidelines that we have to follow if we suspect concerns regarding abuse or neglected children. We are mandated reporters, and clients need to be made aware of that. So in summary, things to keep in mind when you're drafting your occupancy agreement, when you're talking to your families. The occupancy agreement cannot mandate that the client participate in any of the treatments or services. Of course, as we discussed, it can be strongly encouraged, but we can't make it mandatory as enrollment in our programs. This document also has other names, sublease, for instance, you might see, or other names that you might, but for the purposes of our CoC and for our training, we call it the occupancy agreement. This agreement should be reviewed with the client monthly and signed off on by some agencies have a one-page sheet that they have from January to December, and each month when they meet with the client, they have them signed. That's important to be in the record as well. Must be present in all types of HUD-funded programs, permanent supportive, transitional, rapid rehousing. We talked earlier about the income information where applicable, 30% of families' monthly adjusted income, mainly that applies to our permanent supportive housing programs. This agreement is between the client and the housing provider. It is not it's not like a lease where it's the landlord and the tenant or the landlord and the subrecipient. The occupancy agreement is between the housing provider and the occupant. By using this occupancy agreement, you include one of the great things that I love about this agreement, that it includes some of the other mandated forms, as we discussed previously, the Vawa sublease, the fair housing guidelines, the correct termination proceedings. Oftentimes in years past, we've seen organizations who have termination proceedings in their agreements, but it's not the correct HUD required language. So this document has that language. And also your mandated reporter information, all part of this documentation. So it actually consolidates your case record by having everything into this agreement. That's what I love about it. And again, this document can be modified to fit your agency's need, the population that you're serving. So, feel free to go on our website, our CoC website, and you can download a copy of this agreement and modify it to your organization. But this document is a requirement for our CoC HUD-funded programs. I hope this training was helpful. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have. Thank you and have a great day.